Dear friends, Joshua toppling the walls of Jericho is a pure and unadulterated biblical legend. If you wish, it is a form of biblical myth. And I want to say it clear. It has been more than 50 years since Kathleen Kenyon excavated that site and published her findings. She began her meticulous archaeological excavation of Jericho in 1953 and kept publishing it until her death in 1979. It must be said loud and clear. At the time of Joshua, there were no city walls to be toppled, and there was hardly any settlement to be conquered. In the biblical book of Joshua, we read, of course, how Yahweh commanded Joshua and Israelites to march peacefully around the city for 6 days, and on the 7th morning to march 7 times around, and then sound their horns or war trumpets, and at that sound of those horns, the city walls of Jericho came toppling down. Jericho was thus the first great victory in the Israelites' military conquest of the Promised Land. However, what I have just described is a pure biblical legend, as I've said. Dramatic, captivating, nevertheless a mythic legend. Of course, there was the city called Jericho. No doubt about it. Today it is a world-famous archeological location. And last year it was declared an UNESCO World Heritage Site. It is one of the oldest cities ever found. Its beginnings go all the way back to the Mesolithic, the Middle Stone Age. In Palestine, also called Lower Natufian. That was 9,000 years before Common Era, 11,000 years ago from now. That was really very long time ago. At the very beginning of our human civilization, right on the doorstep of agriculture. It was so long ago that for next 4,000 years people did not have the technology to make pottery. And in Jericho, they built first religious shrine next to a spring, and based on the remnants of stone industry started to settle down. Still hundreds of years later, in pre-pottery Neolithic, New Stone Age, 10,000 years ago, inhabitants of Jericho built their first city walls, 12 feet high and almost 6 feet wide. Archaeologists uncovered at least 3 different phases of fortification in this place, 3 archaic city walls dated to different periods of occupation, from pre-pottery to early bronze to middle bronze periods. But here is this big problem with those city walls. From the end of the Middle Bronze Age and through the Late Bronze Age and into that Iron Age transition, Jericho was in decline, and it did not have any walls. At the time of Joshua, at the time to which the Bible situates or projects the story of Joshua, and several centuries before and after, at that time Jericho did not have any city walls to be toppled. There were many city walls before, and there were some fortifications after, even a fortress of the Herodes the Great nearby, but absolutely no walls at the time of Joshua. If Jericho was occupied at all during that time, there was perhaps a small village existing amidst old ruins. Possibly that gave that rise to this biblical legend about walls which came down as a result of divine intervention. Based on the evidence of the Jericho pottery dated to the Late Bronze Age, it would appear that Jericho was reoccupied on a small scale on the second half of the 15th century before Common Era. As I have stated earlier, this has been known for more than half a century, and there are still people who repeat and others who believe the tall tales which have been refuted long times ago. This is my first, the archeological reason for claiming that toppling Jericho walls is a myth. But I also have a religious reason, argument based on religious literature. This biblical myth about toppling of the walls of Jericho has a relatively close parallel preserved on a cuneiform tablet with a religious literature from Ugarit. It is the epos of King Keret or Kirtu. And just like Joshua received his instructions from God, here is King Keret receiving his instructions. Go for a day and a second, a third, a fourth day, a fifth, a sixth day, and look, at the sunrise of the seventh day you will come to Udum, abounding in rain, and to well-watered Udum. Then attack the city, lay siege to this town. Drive from the fields the woodcutters, from the threshing floors the straw gatherers, drive from well the water drawers, from the spring the bottle fillers. Then rest a day and a second, a third, a fourth day, a fifth, a sixth day. Do not fire your arrows to the city, your sling stones at the citadel. And look, at sunrise on the seventh day, Pabil the king of Udum will not sleep, for the bellowing noise of his bulls, for the braying sound of his asses, for the lowing of his plough oxen, for the howling of his hunting dogs. And he will send messengers to you to carry it at your military camp. Thus says the king Pabil. It is not an identical story, as you can see. However, there are also clear similarities. 6 days of siege without armed conflict, 7th day brings resolution. And that resolution arrives because of the loud noise. As a result, Israelites spare and take with them the prostitute Rahab. By the way, according to the genealogy of the Gospel of Matthew, she was a great-great-grandmother of King David, and thus, according to the Bible, was a direct ancestress of Jesus. While King Keret departed Udum with maiden Huriah, who became his spouse and mother of his children and co-founder of his dynasty. There are, of course, differences. The loud sound in Ugaritic version is coming from within the walls of the city, from the distressed animals, while in the Bible it is a loud sound of those war trumpets around the walls. But the biggest difference is in the outcome. Keret takes maiden Huriah and lets Udum to live, while the biblical version is bloodier and more destructive. At the end of that story, Jericho is completely destroyed and all its inhabitants slaughtered. And so these are my reasons for claiming that Joshua toppling the walls of Jericho is a mythical legend. Firstly, at the time and several centuries before and after, as I've said, there were no city walls to be toppled. And secondly, the legend itself has close parallel in Canaanite mythology, and it follows established traditional forms about besieging the cities. Such non-identical but close parallel is even stronger confirmation of this legendary nature. The Jericho story, the first city captured on the west bank of Jordan River by Joshua, is a myth, and something many people might not want to hear about the Bible. And allow me here a small excursus. While reading ancient Middle East literature side by side with the Bible, one is confronted with a reality which might be difficult for many. The Hebrew Bible narratives and text in general are often as vicious and brutal, and sometimes even more brutal, than the versions written by those supposedly vile and despicable Canaanites. Both Jericho walls and Keret's siege of Udum are legends. Yet as legends, or exactly because they are legends, they have timeless message for us, something to teach us and for us to learn. I personally participated on a number of so-called Jericho walks. During the dark years of Trumpian persecution of migrants and asylum seekers, I was marching with many others activists 7 times around the federal building in downtown Manhattan or around detention centers where Immigration and Custom Enforcement Agency kept people before deportation. It was our way of registering our protest against unjust and inhumane, xenophobic regime. And there were also few happy occasions when we succeeded and liberated some detainees after our protests and pressure and maybe smart lawyering. They were released from unjust captivity. You may say, metaphorically, we also saw at least some of the walls of arrogance and xenophobia coming down. As Robert Frost once powerfully observed, something there is that doesn't love a wall.